Hello, everyone. Welcome. I'm Sharon Waxman. I'm the founder and the editor-in-chief of The Wrap. Welcome to today's webinar, Allies Unite, Fixing a Broken System and Using Your Platform for Change. Today, I'll be speaking with an esteemed panel of producers, actors, entrepreneurs, and political strategists who will talk about their own experiences and work, but also share effective ways each of us can take action to drive systemic change against racism. Our speakers today are Emmanuel Acho, Dr. Maya Rockamore Cummings, Adam Platzner, and Tika Sumter, and we'll be introducing them in just a moment. For myself, we're committed to devoting the WRAP's platform to drive constructive change at this critical moment in American history and in empowering the creative community to do so. If you're interested in reading more of our coverage on this issue and other issues related to diversity and entertainment, please check out our WrapPRO members platform that provides exclusive news, insights, and events. For more information, you can go to thewrap.com/pro. I'd also invite you to check out WrapWomen, a community of influential women who are committed to changing the face of our industry through media, live events, and our newsletters. To find out more about that, you can go to WrapWomen, one word, wrapwomen.com. And for today's webinar, we've put together a list of charities as recommended by our speakers that you can support, and you can find details for those organizations in the events description below on your live stream. So before we get started, I have a few housekeeping notes for everybody. I'll be speaking with our panelists for 40 minutes. After that, we'll be taking questions from you all for 20 minutes. We encourage you to participate by asking questions in the comment section. And throughout the webinar, please share your thoughts on social media. You can tag us at The Wrap. And one more thing, one of our panelists, Ty Rudolph, is not able to join us today because of a personal emergency, but she is fine. And we still have a great lineup for you here today. That's it. So before introducing our panelists, I wanted to share a clip from one of today's speakers from a video that he's done that's gone viral in the past week. Let's take a listen.
You know, another question I get from my white friends, they ask me, why do you think white privilege exists? And I say this, if you and I were in a race and the official at the start line, they held me back for the first 200 meters, and you had a 200-meter then head start, the only way to level out that race is to either stop you from running or put me on a golf cart and catch you up and catch myself up. Well, you see, what we've done in America is we've simply said, okay, Emmanuel, you're now free to run. And we've acted as if it's a fair race, when in all honesty, Black people were held back for hundreds of years. And so within the late 1960s, we say, okay, Black people, you can go now. That's not a fair race.
That is brought to you by one of our panelists, Emmanuel Acho. Emmanuel is a former NFL linebacker for the Cleveland Browns and the Philadelphia Eagles. In 2016, he began his broadcasting career at ESPN, where he served as the youngest national football analyst. Last week, Emmanuel launched this YouTube series titled Uncomfortable Conversations with a Black Man, and you just saw a clip. Welcome, Emmanuel.
Good to see you, Sharon. Good to be here.
Thank you. Dr. Maya Rockamore Cummings is the widow of the late Congressman Elijah Cummings and the CEO of Global Policy Solutions, the author of the forthcoming book, Rageism, Race, Age, Gender, Exclusion, and the Politics of Health Equity. Welcome, Dr. Cummings. I'm just going to call you Maya because it feels warmer. Welcome.
Thanks for having me on, Sharon.
Thank you. Adam Platzner is the co-founder of Celebrity Driven Rights Initiatives, ITakeResponsibility.org, a vehicle to eradicate racism by encouraging white Americans to call out hate, step up, and take action. The first campaign is in partnership with the NAACP with a PSA that will launch tomorrow. And we have a production glitch because Tika's bio seems to have disappeared on me, but I'm just going to wing it here. Tika, well, welcome to Tika, who is
Hi.
well known as an actress on the show Mixed-ish, and also is an activist in her own right. She's also launched a podcast with Ty Randolph, who couldn't make it today, that addresses the needs and the lives of Black mothers. I hope I have that right. And it's a podcast that you can find on any podcast platform. Welcome to Tika.
Yay.
Thank you. Sorry if I missed something there, and you can fill me in.
Not important.
Thank you. So welcome to everyone. Let's just start with, this happens to be live streaming at the very moment that George Floyd's funeral is happening, which I don't think we knew that we didn't certainly intentionally schedule it. But it is a moment of great emotion and great gravity for what it represents and what is happening in America. Let me just start with you, Emmanuel, because we saw that clip. How are you experiencing this moment, and what set you on the path to doing this conversation with with the world, which has gone viral? I understand it was like 20 million views or something for that clip.
Yeah. Last I heard, I guess north of 22 million. Ultimately, my goal was to start a dialogue. I grew up in white culture. I went to an all-white private school in Dallas, Texas, and I'm first generation American. I'm Nigerian American, so I don't deal with the same hurt and pain in my heart due to years upon years of slavery. But nonetheless, Sharon, I'm clothed in a 6'2", 240-pound Black frame. And so when I step outside, I'm still perceived as a threat. And so I realized there's a disconnect. Let's call it what it is. There's a disconnect between our white brothers and sisters and our Black brothers and sisters. And it's because of limited exposure. I hung out with so many of my white friends, and they asked me questions I never thought they had. For example, questions like, well, how come y'all only care about white on Black crime and not Black on Black crime? Or how come Black people can say the N-word, but white people can't? I wanted to expose so many of the questions. I wanted to educate the white community because several of my white friends are too scared to ask, or frankly, they just don't have Black friends. And a big issue is a lack of education and exposure.
Well, I think that that's something that we want to be talking about today, because much of what I think has come to the fore now is the white community, myself included, feeling the need to own our share of responsibility in driving this change, and accepting the fact that we have not educated ourselves sufficiently. Tika, I mean, I want to ask this of all of you, honestly, but let's just start with Tika. Do you want to jump in and say, how have you been experiencing this moment, and does it make you hopeful? Does it make you want to talk more or listen more? I feel like I should be in full-on listening mode.
Yeah, I think I have had a range of emotions. It went from anger to feeling hopeless to feeling hopeful, and then what can I do, to make lives better and to make I have a 3-year-old, and to make her life better. And with all of this happening, it's like we forget we're in the middle of a pandemic. You know what I mean? And it's literally we're marching and we're doing all the things to save our own lives while also being the highest at-risk group of people. You know what I mean? So it's like a double whammy. So it's a feeling of like change that is happening, obviously, and moving forward, and especially in the entertainment industry, which we'll talk about, I'm sure, later. But I'm feeling hopeful today. And I'm feeling but very protective of our community, obviously, and glad that people are actually engaging in real conversations. And again, like Emmanuel said, I think it is an education factor where people just didn't have to educate themselves about these things, or haven't heard about what white fragility is and all these things. And so I hope that for me, the hope is that our white counterparts actually educate themselves. And even when he said, my friends don't understand why Black people can say the N-word and we can, it's like, I would hope they wouldn't even want to say it, and why would they?
For sure.
I think this is a open dialogue. I think now more than ever, it's driving us to talk about the wound that has never been healed.
Yes.
Maya, please jump in here and talk to us about sort of what's the context in which you, coming from a public health perspective, see this. And obviously, we can't even think about this moment of unrest without, some homage to your late husband, who is missed, Elijah Cummings, who is a monumental figure in the civil rights movement and a warrior against the hate that's been put up by this current administration. I'm just going to say it. It's true.
Well, thank you for being frank, and you're absolutely correct. I'm experiencing this moment as a sense of deja vu. I don't know if you all remember, but just 5 years ago, it was Baltimore City that was up in arms with, troops on the street, tanks on the corners, and upset African Americans who were just basically mad because of decades of having, bad relationships with the police. And then it culminating in the death of a young man named Freddie Gray, who climbed into the back of a police paddy wagon perfectly fine and somehow came out with a neck that was severed, and he died several days later. He basically had a fatal injury while in police custody. And, the system colluded to make sure that the officers were not held to account, even though our local district attorney, called a state's attorney here, tried to intercede and charge the officers. And so my late husband, stood on that street corner and he put his reputation on the line and he put his body on the line to try to calm the public down, to try to make sure that there wasn't a greater toxic explosion in the city. And to try to basically bring peace. And so, now here we are 5 years later, and we'll continue to be here if we don't address the structural changes that are needed in this society, not only in the area of policing, but in the area of health, education, economic security. We have work to do as a nation, and that work is to get rid of the racist, anti-Black system that's currently operating across our areas of influence. So that we can actually have real opportunities for diverse people to live in a fair and inclusive society.
Mm-hmm. Well, we'll talk more about the book that you're working on in a moment. We'll have time to get to that. And also, your Elijah Cummings has a book coming out in the fall. That's coming out first, and I'd love to hear more about that. But first, let me turn to Adam. We thought it was important to have someone in this discussion who is white, who is not Black, and who is ready to step up and say, what's my job here? What do I need to do? So, Adam, can you talk a little bit about your own consciousness raising, if that is what it was, and what are some of the things that you are working on?
Sure. I mean, and thanks for including me in this. If you had told me 2 weeks ago that I would be here on this panel, I would have not believed you. This is not something that I intended to do. I have a very special situation, which is that I'm partners with Tommy and Cody Oliver, who are incredible people, Black filmmakers. I go back with Cody to college years. She would probably want me to say that she was a freshman when I was a super senior. So they're family to me. And, our company is a special company, Confluential Content. And we have projects at HBO and Netflix, but Tommy's just finished directing a social justice documentary that's incredibly powerful. It's special, our company, because we're a family, but for me, at least, I learn on a daily basis in a way that I don't think most people are lucky enough. Most white Americans are lucky enough to learn, or maybe even have family members that are Black, as Cody and Tommy are to me. And all of that being said, I'm horrified. I've been horrified by, forever, but in these last several weeks, it's just been incomprehensible to me. And I was sitting on this couch looking into a camera like this, as we've all become familiar with this kind of new way of life. And we have 2 of these a week with our entire company. And at the end of our call about 2 weeks ago, I said, just kind of, not matter of factly, but I was like, what are we going to do? And Tommy was like, and if you know Tommy, and I know Tika knows Tommy, she was in a PSA that Tommy did that's incredible called We Shall Overcome 4 years ago. And sadly, it seems like it was shot today. But in any event, I said, what are we going to do? And Tommy said, well, about what? You know, we were rolling through a lot of things in our company. And I said about inequity, about all of these horrific acts. And Tommy leaned into the camera and he's like that. And he said, what are you going to do? And I get the chills. It was only about 2 weeks ago. And I haven't been sleeping in general. And I spent the whole night and I was on social media and I saw Rihanna say this incredible speech at the Image Awards. You know, you like to have, essentially, I'm going to paraphrase. I don't want to take up too much time.
Pull up.
Well, pull up, pull up.
Pull up.
Right. She said, pull up. And Tommy said, what are you going to do? And Toni Morrison said, you know, white people need to figure out what they're doing. You know, all of these things. And I saw them, you know, Sedan Smith, Cody had posted his video, which was crazy.
All right. So fast forward.
Sorry.
Yes, that's okay. It's okay. Fast forward.
And I plan on actually listening for the rest of this, but you asked.
Yes.
And essentially I felt, you did. I just felt that from what I've learned is that there was a disconnect, to Emmanuel's point. There is a disconnect, even for me. I had never heard it that way before. Yeah. And we need to take responsibility. White people need to take responsibility for racism in their daily lives and stopping it and calling it out. If you see it, if it seems like a small thing, it's not a small thing. I look at everything as an entrepreneur. If we're going to, you know, I hate this word, but if we're going to disrupt racism, then we need to do things that we haven't been doing before. And so anyway, to make a long story short, I ran all this by Tommy and Cody, and we're launching a huge initiative starting tomorrow, which I think, well, I'm proud of it. We're all proud of it. It's been quite a 2 weeks trying to get it all together, and I hope it makes a difference, and I think that it will. And a lot of amazing celebrities have come out to be a part of it, and I'm not really allowed to say anymore.
So basically, it's a PSA focused on not Black people, but what white people should be doing, right?
Yes,
that's the focus.
That's correct.
I think what distinguishes it, right?
Correct.
So
it's white people talking to white people, and hopefully, you know, changing that disconnect.
And can you tell us some of the people who are in it?
I know you want me to.
I got the press release, so I actually know who's in it. Yeah.
Thank you, Sharon, for keeping, you know, we like everything that was started very quickly. It was supposed to launch yesterday. It's launching tomorrow. I'm sorry we can't play it for you.
We were going to show it today. That was the hope that we could, right. But that's okay. That's okay. We'll all see it tomorrow. There's some very famous people. I think that's really what we want to focus on today is sort of what are some of the things that can you recommend to the many people who are watching this live stream today? What can each of us do? People of any background, people are out in the streets by the thousands and hundreds of thousands, really all across America, which is great. I'd love to hear from each of you sort of what else do you think we should be doing, we can be, particularly because we're talking about the creative community, which is so powerful and so influential. So, I mean, Emmanuel, do you want to jump in? Do you have thoughts?
Of course. I think to Maya's point, first and foremost, educate yourself and acknowledge that there's a fracture in the system. When I said, what is white privilege? And I defined it as such, I said, white privilege is not saying that your life hasn't been difficult as a white person. White privilege is simply saying your skin color, it hasn't contributed to the difficulty of your life. I think that we so often in 2020, my white counterparts, they're looking at life and saying, well, I've run the same race that you've run. We each get to run one figurative lap, that lap being our years on earth. However, if you look at life, it's a relay race, and our generations, they run the race before us. And white people have started significantly further ahead than Black people. Well, what do you mean, Emmanuel? Look at our school system. Public schools, 50% are funded by property taxes. Well, if because of redlining, Black people had to live in lower socioeconomic areas, And the housing, it funds the schooling, and the schooling then is poor. And the two ways in America to acquire wealth historically are through real estate and through property taxes. Then Black people have been set up and born to fail. So what can we do? We can first, and my plea to my white friends and my white brothers and sisters is acknowledge that there's a problem, because you can't fix something that you don't realize is broken. Acknowledge that there's a problem, and then take ownership and accountability. How can I individually remedy the problem within my domain? That's my solution.
Mm.
Yeah.
Tika, did you want to jump in?
Yeah, it's weird because I'm in a dynamic situation where my fiance is white, and we were in therapy the other day, and he said he's learned a lot from me, but he said it's weird. It feels like I would be complaining about a scratch when you have a gash in your head, and nobody has helped you bandage it, and he's talking to his friends. You know what I mean? I think the smaller things is like talking to each other, and white men and women really seeing, like, even just the video of that lady speaking to the bird watcher. Like, have you grabbed your purse, in the elevator? Have you, like, what are your everyday day-to-day situations where you are projecting, this stereotypical racist way on others? And I would say within the system that I'm in, entertainment, I think every year we have like Black People Initiative, and like, we're going to get more of us in, and we're going to tell our stories. And it's like, when, in an agency, how it works, like at a WME, right? You start in the mailroom, and then you work your way up to hopefully become an agent. But the only way to start in the mailroom, really, you're probably making $15 an hour, which you can't really live off of in LA, is if you have a parent who can actually balance that out, right? And when you're looking at most Black kids who are trying to get into our industry, they don't always have that dynamic in their lives. I didn't have it. And so what you're doing is you're pushing out a bunch of people who have the potential and the talent just like anybody else. So I think we really have to ramp up and implement real life, real life tools so people can actually thrive in a system. And if we're going to tell our own stories, you got to give people green lighting power. They can't just be interns forever. They have to really be able to work through the system and actually like create decision makers. It's like when every studio head is actually the same color and there's no Black people, that's also a problem, because then who are retelling our stories? Like, we always complain about, we hear the slave narrative always, or the white savior. How are those getting made? But then when we talk about trying to make something like a Black Wall Street or all those kind of empowering situations of like, we had a whole dynamic of money going in and out, circulating. The dollar circulated within the Black community 100 times over until it was burnt down and bombed. So it's like all these different stories. You have to give people the tools to actually make movement in the entertainment industry rather than just giving lip service.
Mm-hmm. Well, one of the things I want to just contribute something that Ty and I spoke about, because she had every intention of being here. So she is the general manager of Kevin Hart's
Laugh Out
Loud production company. So she is an African American decision maker at a very influential production company, and that was one of the things that she was talking about in a very I think specific and concrete way. How do we get more African American people in positions of decision making, in positions of leadership, not just in front of the camera, not just behind the camera? And those things are really important. But ultimately, you can't make decisions about projects unless you actually have people of diverse backgrounds. And I would also say gender balance, because I feel strongly about that as well, to tell the stories, all the stories that are out there to tell.
And Sharon, if I could jump in, because Ty is my partner at Sugarberry, which we started, it's like the Brown Mama's Guide to the Sweet Life, where we wanted to create a space for mothers. But what we want to say is diversity or Black stories isn't just some kind of charity. It's actually good business, because we might be a small percent of this country, but we over index in viewing. We over-index in buy. Like, just imagine, Black women are 7% of the population, but over-index 40% in buying baby food. I mean, the numbers are crazy, you know, in just general. So it's like, we're not just like some charity, like give us a job and like, you know, do us a favor. It's like, no. Our community is good business.
Well, I endorse that. I've always endorsed that. But I think today what the country is saying is we want to be a different country, and entertainment has a huge role to play. So I wouldn't downplay the sort of moral imperative that goes with telling diverse stories to reflect the country that we want to be. And I hope that's where we're at today. Maya, can we turn for a moment to the book that you're working on? You work in the health sector. Talk a little bit about how just the thesis and what it's working on, how it feeds into what's going on today.
Yeah, let me just, for over 25 years, I've actually worked in the social justice sector, if you will. I've focused on politics and policy and its intersection with health, education, economic security, and even technology. So I work across issue areas, but I've always been focused on politics and policy. How can we drive an agenda and a framework for change that addresses structural inequities in our system? And so with that, you know, the book itself is called Rageism, Race, Age, Gender, Exclusion, and the Politics of Health Equity. Now, I signed the contract for this book before COVID-19 ever hit. But, you know, my argument is basically, you know, our lives, there is a hierarchy of value placed on bodies in our society. And in this particular country, the value is basically the value lessens the darker that you get. So we have a hierarchy of value placed on bodies by race and ethnicity. And frankly, that's the, you know, the definition of racism. But it shows up in terms of the quality of the lives lived, the opportunities that people get, the longevity of the lives lived. And so that is why we typically call it health disparities, people dying, you know, at younger ages because of a whole bunch of systemic inequities, such as, you know, where you live, contributing to how well and how long you live, your zip code actually undermining your life's opportunities. And we have the opportunity to break these structural inequities. And so I offer some solutions in that book. I just want to shift quickly to Hollywood. Wouldn't it be great if all of the industry leaders, you know, those who had agencies, those who had movie studios and others, would sign on to a declaration of inclusion and opportunity where they actually commit to 7 key things that they will do, including some principles and values that, you know, include also building pipelines to opportunity. So that young people who are being excluded from the hierarchy of opportunity in Hollywood get a fair chance, but also committing to, you know, equitable job, business, and financing opportunities for individuals of different backgrounds. I think it's time for Hollywood to commit. And let me finally say, the reason why Hollywood is so important for the nation and the world, frankly, is that the cultural product that they put out contributes to the biases and the stereotypes that we see, which then contributes to how people are thinking about public policy and then how they legislate and put these frames into place. So it's all interconnected, and Hollywood is incredibly important. And we need to make sure that we're diversifying across the board.
Well, that's quite a lot you put out there. And a lot to think about. Let me ask Adam, you work with a lot of very bold-faced names. You sold a company that you built with Ron Meyer, the vice chairman of Universal, and Quincy Jones. You sold it to a major production company. This is in your previous incarnation, as I understand it. How do you think people would respond to this idea of actually signing on to some kind of concrete commitment like Maya is suggesting?
If they, I mean, I couldn't imagine them not, and that would. I
could.
Yeah, I mean, I just
for sure could.
No problem.
Everybody was talking about inclusion riders and all that stuff, good stuff, 2 years ago too.
That's right. Yes. Yep. That's right.
Totally. And we need to figure out how to approach it in a different way. I agree with everything that Maya said, and certainly we are a different company because we're Black owned, plus me. So you know. I agree, and anything that we can do and that I can do to help with that, great. And I think that the studio heads and the heads of agencies and all the players need to, get their heads screwed on straight.
Well, I think asking
if I
to
may,
give up power is never an easy thing. Yes, Emmanuel.
Yeah, to Maya's point, and really to Tiga's point, we see this across the playing field in all forms and shapes of entertainment. For example, to Maya's point, it's a matter of cronyism and nepotism. You hire those who look like you. You hire those that you're friends. We see this. It might not necessarily reflect as entertainment, but in the NFL, where I spent the most of my thus far adult years, all the owners are white, and the owners hire managers that look like them who are white, and the managers hire those that look like them, and coaches who are white. And the coaches hire them who look like the coaches hire those who look like them, and the assistant coaches who are white. And now you have a problem. So the only way to change that problem is to mandate some sort of integration. It's not enough to just tolerate integration. It's not enough to forbid segregation, but now you would almost have to mandate it, because what Tiga said was the most profound thing, is that even if it's not a let's mandate integration for the sake of Black people, it increases the product in any field. If you look at Hollywood, if you look at entertainment, she spoke on that. If you look at other forms in athletics, whether it's Serena Williams, whether it's LeBron James, whether it's anybody, Misty Copeland, ballet, when you allow for integration, it increases the work across the board. And so I just agree with both of these women, everything they said. That's what we need. It's imperative.
Can you address the sports universe for just a minute? Because it's very powerful what you said when you sort of pull it back and look. And by the way, also true in media, run by white, actually mostly men. I'm exceptional in that, run a female-owned organization, but really, like, what we're going, back to sort of, this all goes back to the symbol that Colin Kaepernick created. And now you're seeing people bending on a knee all over the place, in Congress. And this, courageous man created that template, that very, noble, I would say. Will it change, do you think, in the NFL? If I can ask?
Absolutely not. I don't think it'll change. But I don't think it'll change because it's very simple. 2016, everyone knows Colin Kaepernick, he takes a knee. The agenda was moved to being about disrespecting the flag. The goal was never to disrespect the flag. It was to protest social injustice.
Yes.
In 2018, the NFL commissioner, he bans taking a knee. Players are not allowed to take a knee anymore. Well, last week we saw the commissioner of the NFL, mind you, the NFL, which literally owns one day of the week, garnering more than 30 million views when you're talking about the Super Bowl or Monday Night Football. The NFL, the commissioner, he comes out and says, we were wrong. Well, that sounds good, but the problem is talk is cheap. If you want to address things in the NFL, Sharon, I'll give you one final example. In 2003, the NFL, the National Football League, it mandated something called the Rooney Rule. If there is a head coaching vacancy, you must interview a Black candidate. You don't have to hire him. You just have to interview him. In 2007, for the first time in NFL history, 2 Black coaches met in the Super Bowl, the highest level of competition in the National Football League. The first Super Bowl was played in the 1950s. It's not a coincidence that 4 years after mandating a rule which you interview a Black person, 2 Black coaches, they meet in the Super Bowl. So the NFL has a problem because owners, you don't become a billionaire by being selfless. And there's a conflict of interest when you allow players to disrespect the flag, but you're also trying to look out for the best interest of the player.
So let me just say this. I mean, there once was a time in our country where radio stations and broadcast stations were all white owned. And then legislation was passed to basically mandate that a certain percentage of broadcast stations would go to diverse ownership. Certainly we backed off of, and of course there once was a time where, universities and colleges could, were all white and mostly men, women couldn't go. And then we passed legislation in this country to create affirmative action programs to ensure that those who had been left out had an opportunity. Wasn't that they were any less smart, they just weren't, they were being locked out. So the question becomes, are we at a moment where we can look across the board at how we actually create policies and laws that structure some of these opportunities if there won't be a voluntary effort to move toward diversifying? I have to say that there is a democratic imperative. We are an increasingly diverse society. one that will be a majority minority, quote unquote, by the year 2043. And so, what kind of society do you think we're building where the majority of people are Black and brown and diverse, and yet all of the institutions of power and wealth are not? I can tell you it won't be a good thing. And so with that, if we're committed to focusing on a diverse and inclusive future, then we need to make sure that the institutions are reflective of that, the opportunities are reflective of that, so that our kids can live in a better society.
Well, I'm so glad you said that. I mean, we're focused on police brutality in particular, but that is really just, one thread of this tapestry of things that need to change and become more diverse. So it's great for you to point out, Maya, that we have all these different sectors, media, entertainment, policy making, sports. These are all the institutions that run the country, and that makes up a democracy. So with your guys' permission, I'd like to start taking some questions. We have a whole lot of questions lined up from our viewers. Is that all right? Let's take one. Zoe is our wonderful moderator, and she will offer up a question. All right, here's one. I've seen people post unacceptable social media comments 10 years back, and they're essentially shunned forever. Can people still feel incentive to learn and change when you see that happening often? So that's a great question. People maybe made insensitive comments in the past. We saw the editor, by the way, of Bon Appetit magazine had to resign yesterday, one of a whole bunch of people resigning over a brown face party photo that had been posted on Instagram. It's a great question, and there's a lot that's in there, and anybody wants to jump in and unpack that of like how you can, is forgiveness allowed? It just feels like there's a lot of mob mentality out there, and we just want to blame people when there is underlying. And I think the sense out there, we want to help, we want to move forward, but yeah, maybe I said something 10 years ago I'm embarrassed about, and if I speak up, I'll be shamed, or Emmanuel, you want to take that one, or Tika?
I'll take that. I'll take it.
I'll hop on.
I feel
you both can go
on the same page. Here's the issue. In this day and age, the pro and the con of social media is that everyone has a voice and everyone has an opinion, and you're going to hear that opinion. Here is what we need to realize, I think, as a society. Here's what we need to realize as Black people and as white people is, if you don't allow space for ignorance, then there will never be learning. If you don't allow space for naivety, then there will never be learning. I think that we don't have an overt racism problem in 2020. We don't still have people that own slaves, to my knowledge, and we don't still have most white people saying the N-word. But what we do have is racial ignorance. For example, oh, you're so smart for a Black man. You're so pretty, Tika, for a Black woman. Emmanuel, you're like an Oreo, Black on the outside, white on the inside. Oh, you don't even dress like you're Black. These are things that I'm sure me, Tika, Maya have all existed under. And so when I look at that question, yes, there has to be space for learning, because otherwise I will sit ignorant, and ignorant plays itself out when pushed. What I mean by that, Amy Cooper, New York, in the dog park.
Yeah.
I don't think she's an overt racist. If you ask Amy Cooper, hey, do you hate Black people on the street? She's not going to say, I can't stand Black people. But when pushed, she realizes there's a little subliminal racial ignorance that pours itself out. And so there has to be incentivization to still learn, even when there have been mistakes in the past. Otherwise, we will relive our past.
You're pretty forgiving of that lady in the park. I don't know if most of it forgive me. Anyway, Tika.
I think there can be forgiveness, but I also think people have to understand within that there are going to be consequences, right?
Yes.
Like, you're going to have a lot of time to think about what you said, because the forgiveness doesn't have to happen tomorrow, And to be honest, it's like, it depends on forgiving what. You know what I mean? Are you going into a church and shooting up everybody? Nah, you don't get forgiveness for that. But, or maybe you do. Some of the people have forgiven, this man who did this crazy thing at a church. But I have to say, like, yes, you have to be incentivized to like try to learn, But I think you have a lot of time when you know there's actually going to be consequences to your actions. And people, and I feel like the onus is always on Black people to forgive, and to do it so quickly, And yes, I'm a believer in God and Jesus, but I think you got to give us time, because it's not even the big overt racism. It's the microaggressions that we fight every day that has now sunken into some of the DNA in Black women, and some of the reasons why they're dying is the stress of every day fighting. And it's all those things that I think people have to really look at. It's not always like, oh, I called you the N-word. It's the
right.
Exactly.
Do you belong there? Are you in first?
Exactly.
It's the, oh, how did you get that? It's constantly feeling like on the defense of everything because you're questioned because of the color of your skin. And just one more thing, I do see the difference. Like, Nick, my fiance, did not know everything when we got into this relationship. It dug up a lot of cultural differences in general. He's a white dude who kind of goes about in the world as he wants to. And at first he didn't understand, like, me saying, did you see how she treated me and how she treated you? He's like, no. And then when he saw it. And he's like, you have to deal with that all the time. So I'm nervous walking into a store that I know I can afford stuff in, but I shouldn't be nervous. And it's all those things, that add up.
She's absolutely right. Stress kills, racism kills. And that's actually what I'm tackling in the book. So thank you for pointing that out in a very accessible way, Tika. I just want to say this. I taught, when I was earning my PhD, I taught graduate students. I taught undergraduate students. And I taught them in political science, and I taught them in gender studies. And they would come into my class, and it was a mandatory course. They would come into my class and, about once they got comfortable, they would talk about the kinds of values that were passed along in their family, the kinds of beliefs, the kinds of things that they said about people of color in their families. And it opened my eyes to how actually the family unit serves as a purveyor of values and culture, just as much as, Hollywood does. And so with that, I think that, we have to make sure that we're educating, but doing anti-racist, anti-biased training in our own families and with ourselves. And by educating ourselves, but also by making sure that we understand what our biases are, and then actively working against them and teaching our kids something different. We're going to have to break this, and it's going to have to start at the level of values.
That was beautiful. Have to say, some of the most heartbreaking videos we've seen are of young, little, tiny Black children just expressing themselves. And in some ways it's beautiful, but in some ways it's tragic. They should not have to even be aware of these things. All right, let's tee up another question. I think we have one. Okay, from Aaron Nashar, question. In an effort to federalize the systemic change necessary, do you see that being even plausible under the Trump administration? I think I know the answer to that one. If not, how can we keep the momentum going into 2021? Great question.
All right. We have a major problem sitting in the White House. And what we've seen over the past 3.5 years is that Donald Trump won office with a message of white supremacy. Make America Great Again is rife with all of these implicit notions of pre-1965 greatness, pre-civil rights greatness, which excludes a whole swath of the American public. And then they have proceeded to policy make from that position, meaning they've rolled back, access to health care, and then they're trying to destroy it. They have, disassembled, civil rights protections in the labor market, in all kinds of regulations, in the financial sector, all with an eye to, and they were about to, before COVID-19 hit, roll back school lunches and school breakfasts. Free lunch and free breakfast for kids who are poor, who are predominantly Black and brown in this country, in our public schools. until COVID-19 hit. And then a judge had to step in and stop them from doing that. Do you know how many Black and brown families this would have devastated? The man sitting in the White House is leading an effort to roll back 60 years of policy gains that have helped diverse people of all backgrounds get rights. And so with that, we have a historic job to do as a nation right now. It is not just, it's taking the energy that we're bringing to these protests in terms of the protesting police brutality and George Floyd and taking it to the ballot box. Unfortunately, we're having a historic challenge at the same time, and that is that COVID-19 is going to change our election laws in many states with mail-in ballots and other new forms of voting. But we have to push through every new challenge and make sure that we are making our voices heard so that we can change the leadership of this country and therefore change the future of this nation.
And can I just jump in really quick? What we can also do now, like what you can do, Erin, is find out in your neighborhood, your local election leaders, your governors, your mayors, your city council members, your whoever's the superintendent of the education department, all of that stuff. I'm telling you, letters or pushing forward, find somebody who you believe in change-wise. And like, there's so much we can do at the local level. Because obviously those dollars are state-funded things. What is being built in your neighborhood, how we're taking care of homeless people, how we're taking care of just so many other aspects. And I think people sometimes feel helpless because I've felt that way. But more than ever, I literally wrote down every city council member. And if they're not doing what we want them to do, you vote them out.
You vote them out. You vote them out. Thank you, Tika, for bringing it up. Every level of society matters, even school board. All of it matters. And so, I ask for your involvement. I ask for your engagement. I just want to bring it back to Hollywood because, a lot of people wonder, how we leverage, the celebrity factor. And it can be leveraged in a very powerful ways. And so, oftentimes celebrities are able to, there have been people out here pushing on all these issues for a very long time. But they're just, overlooked many times. But oftentimes when you bring somebody who's beloved because of a role that they play or a character that they play into the mix, then the issue gets elevated, you get heard, and you're more likely to be able to push something through. So I do think that there is a marriage here that we have to continue to explore and be deliberate and intentional about exploiting.
Maya, can I ask you a question?
Sure.
Are you thinking about running for office yourself?
So you should just know that I just ran for office. I ran for my late husband's seat. And do you know that I did not win?
I see. Well, I hope you'll run again because a lot of people don't win the first, second, or third time.
I don't know if there'll be a second or third time, but I will say this.
Well, there's other things to run for.
I will say that running for office is always an option that I encourage. I'm a political scientist by trade. My PhD is in political science. And I just definitely encourage people to run for office because, we have to change the world, especially women, because we're not talking about patriarchy here, but it's just as bad and it operates in similar ways to racism. So the intersection of sexism and racism oftentimes, combines in pernicious ways that really undermines life opportunities. So with that, I encourage, people of all backgrounds to run.
You'd be a great governor of Maryland.
I would say I'd vote for you. I'd vote for you. I mean, it is notable, right? That we're 3 years after the Me Too movement broke through and has just created demands for change. We all hope that this is going to be the same kind of change, like real change, and we're not going to go back to the pious phrases and nothing happens again. Okay, new question, Zoe. Put it on up. Here we go. Do you believe people are capable of reform and fundamentally changing their perspectives?
Yeah, I'm going to actually jump in on that one and say absolutely. And the reason I'm going to say absolutely is because I've at least seen it firsthand in conversations. The feedback, I posted that video, Uncomfortable Conversations with a Black Man, and in 5 days it had 22 million views. And I've got responses and emails. Literally one said, hey, Emmanuel, my uncle was in the KKK. But after watching your video, I've now realized what he stood for, what I stand for is wrong. Another girl in South Alabama And she was like, I didn't realize I was racist until having that dialogue. So I believe people are definitely capable of changing their perspective. They just have to be awakened to a new perspective. I was talking to a famous actor 2 days ago and preparing for episode number 2, and he was saying, I never looked at the other side of the coin. I only always saw side of the coin. But now after watching you, after listening to you, I understand there's another side of the coin. So I don't think we should be so quick to judge our society right here and right now. I think that unfortunately it's taken so long, but I do think that hearts are prepared for change. Finally, it's just been way too long, but I definitely think perspectives can turn.
Can you share the story you mentioned to me yesterday when we chatted about going to church and someone who you spoke to about going to church?
So I grew up with like all white people up until I got to college and played in the league and all that. And so I just grew up super white cultured. It was last Friday. I'm spending an evening at dinner with my friends, and they were like, well, Emmanuel, how do we black people? If we want to be more cultured, we don't even know where to find black people. And I was like, I mean, you can go to black churches. I'm like, I go to a black church. And they were like, we thought that was your thing. That was black people's thing. They were like, we didn't want to like intrude. I was like, I said, no, I was like, what you mean? Like, if you came in, we would just be like, oh, cool. I wonder how you got here. I was like, I go to white church all the time. They were like, white church? They were like, no, it's not white church. It's just where we go. I said, no. To you, it's just where you go. But to me, it's white church because I'm the only black person there. And so you have to understand my lens is white church and black church. Your lens is church and black church. And that is, that's the difference in perspectives.
I love that one. Anybody else want to weigh in on this question of whether you can
It's absolutely possible. It's absolutely possible. And I actually do think that we need a national initiative, emergency initiative on diversity and inclusion, in this country. And I do think that we need to mandate diversity, equity, and inclusion training for young people in schools across the country. And I think we also need it community-based as well. I do think that we have a higher standard now, not just because of George Floyd or the protests, but because of what we've been through as a nation over the past 4 years with the Pandora's box of hate being opened up. We have a whole new generation of young people who've been exposed to the bigotry that's emanating from the extreme right wing, and unfortunately, some new recruits. And so we need to actually contain that. And the way we contain it is through education and exposure. And there's a lot that we can do as a society to make sure that young people especially are able to stop the cycle of hate.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think Adam was also talking about how his own perspective just on this, just in this period of time. And Adam, I presume you're a fairly progressive guy, but that something further has kind of clicked in a way that you didn't quite get before.
Every day, I just think that if I agree with everyone here, if I didn't believe that people could change, I think part of what we're trying to do, what we're launching tomorrow, is about education and the ability to change. And I mean, even Tika just mentioning, that she could feel nervous in a store that she belongs in is something it just never even occurred to me. And it blows my mind. Like, that just rocks me. And I just can't believe, I don't think that's a little thing that you said. And I think it's something that we all take for granted. And I think it's something that more people white people in general should process that. Like, that's crazy. That's crazy.
Remember when Oprah was left out of a store in France?
Oh, yeah.
That's right.
Now, Oprah has
say the store's name?
And she was discriminated against.
It was one of the big luxury brands. Yeah. I don't remember which one.
It was Hermes.
Maya, I want to jump in on your point, because we talk so much about education. I think the bigger, if not most pivotal thing to changing a perspective is exposure. I'm first generation American. My parents were born and raised in Nigeria. And so I grew up without any dogs. In Nigeria, you might have goats, but you're not going to have dogs. And so when we come to the US, I don't have any dogs. And as a kid, I grew up without any, and I got attacked by a dog when I was a kid. So now, as a 30-year-old man, when I'm walking through a park, I can't decipher between a dog that's a threat and a dog that's a furry. Like fluffy animal. I can't decipher that. I propose it's the same thing with black and white people. White people don't grow up with black people, so they can't decipher between a black person that might be a threat and a black person, well, that's just black. Black people who don't grow up with white people, they can't decipher between a white person that's racist and a white person that's just white and ignorant. And so I think it really, to Maya's point, it all comes down to exposure, because your perspective is dictated based upon what you know. But if history books were written by white people, and if they are autobiographies instead of biographies, then history is going to be tainted. If Hollywood, if films are directed and produced and edited by predominantly white people, then they will tell a story from their vantage point. So exposure is so critical, in the same manner that I realize not every dog is trying to attack me now. I think that white people can realize the same thing about black people.
And that is why Hollywood is important to all of this, because the representations of people's lived experiences that they put out there, either they contribute to stereotypes, and
Absolutely.
they could, you know, basically break stereotypes if we were intentional about it. But Hollywood is critical to this.
Yeah.
We're gonna run out of time, so let me just take one last question. Here comes from Joseph. I work at a sizable management and production company. As a mid-level executive, what's the best way to approach upper-level management about this issue? Great practical question. Well, Adam is a producer on this panel.
Adam, can
or
Adam,
anybody, sure.
No. I think Adam should answer, but just to break into like the Hollywood point of it. So there are a lot of creators that are Black in Hollywood, right? And writers and producers and directors, right? But you're still in a system where if your advice or your, you know, what you're trying to say is then skewed toward, like, you're fighting for this thing, right? And then it's totally skewed to maybe a white person's gaze, right? Then there's nothing that the Black person in that situation can do. So what I would say is, executives at studios, listen to the people you are actually creating with. I think sometimes people, listen to, they believe their own, whatever it is. I'm trying to basically say, you got to listen to the people you bring in the room to create the thing that you're trying to create. Your opinion, like, be quiet. Your opinion it matters. But if we're talking about Black centered characters, let the Black people talk and tell you what we would do. Not because I've had people say to me, oh, do it more AA, which is do it more African American or sassy. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's like you're giving us all these like things that are stereotypical what you think we are. So you have to give them the power to actually take control of their story that you have bought.
Wow. So that just blew my mind. You're saying that you could be portraying what you think should be portrayed, but then a director is going to tell you, you got to roll your neck and roll your eyes and do it the way that we think that Black people should be portrayed.
Or even go further back in the writing. So say a script is written and a Black writer wrote it. And somebody goes, a producer or executives go, I don't think this character would do that. I think she would say, hey girl, hey girlfriend. That's how things are perpetuated constantly. Oh, Black girls talk like this all the time. Sometimes I do that, but a lot of times I don't. You know what I mean? I do it when I want to do it, and then sometimes I don't.
Fantastic.
You know what I mean? But like, if you think I'm like that all the time, and I talk like this, and I do this thing all the time, like, that's how you think Black women are, just as one monolith, and we have dimensions, and I think when the people in the room are not listening to these directors who are Black, these writers who are Black, these other executives who are in the room, that's the problem. Because what you see, the end result is not always the people who are in the room who actually are Black.
Well, okay, but Joseph doesn't want to get fired when he makes that point to his boss.
I'm sorry, I just had to say that, but I think somebody else should grab this.
That was beautiful. No, that was beautiful. Probably Joseph couldn't be quite as emphatic and not get fired. So, I mean, like, constructively, I don't know.
I mean, I'm not good at being diplomatic in situations like this. And I feel like Joseph, I'm sure, has great relationships within his own company. It's important to have these discussions. And now's the time. I mean,
Yeah.
you know, people running these companies, I think, are all on notice. And
Yep.
it's, you know, like I mean, I was going to say go into your office tomorrow, but nobody's going into their offices. But get on the phone with these people, have conversations, talk to your colleagues. Get a group together, and figure out what needs to be addressed specifically and tangibly, and come up with thoughts on how to do that.
Yep. And
Yeah,
now,
maybe-
like you said, now more than ever, even in
Totally.
just
Don't
the
waste
meetings, just the meetings that I've been having, now more than ever, people are open in these the
Most open.
companies, the production companies, even the studios. Like, there's an openness now that's happening. So this is your chance, Joseph. I know I went off on the last one, but
The time is now, Joseph.
now,
All right, speaking of time, we are out of time, but that I think is a beautiful way to close this really interesting and rich conversation. I'm just going to recap a few things that I took some notes of how we can concretely take the lessons and move forward. What I heard today: expose yourself. Not like that. Expose yourself. Expose yourself to people of color. Read, educate yourself. Donate if you can. Don't be afraid to go to Black church. Be quiet, listen, but also speak up and vote. Those are all the things I heard today. So thank you, everyone on our panel, for being here. Thank you, all our attendees, many of you. Thank you for joining us today. You can watch this again on our website on the Wrap. You can share it with your friends. I hope you will. Stay tuned for more details about our upcoming Wrap events and our initiatives. And let's all continue to work together and have uncomfortable conversations. Thank you for helping us learn today. Thank you all.
thank you so much.
Sharon.
Thanks, guys.
Leadership. Thank you so much.
Thank you.